everyone, we're really excited to be joined by Kim Larsen on this week's episode of Seize the Data. So Logan and I initially met Kim when we were out in the Bay Area for the Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator, and we've stayed connected ever since. So Kim has over 20 years of experience in data, being a data leader at fast-growing tech companies such as Uber, Stitch Fix, Motive, etc., among several others. He's also highly integrated in the Silicon Valley tech startup and data scene, including being a founding member of InvestInData, a data-focused angel syndicate. So that's a little bit about Kim. Let's get right into this week's episode.
Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking about all things BI, from the problems BI teams tend to have, from BI and report sprawl to the future of BI and BI ops, and how Datalogz is creating the future of BI ops. So let's dive right in. Logan, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Tina. And then Kim, thank you very much for being here today. We really appreciate it. If you want to start, would you just be able to give us a quick background of yourself?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. Yes, I got into data. Back then it was called data mining or advanced analytics, probably about 22 years ago. I spent, the last 22 years in the field, mostly on the kind of data science, as it's now called, side of the house, but have run, multiple BI teams as part of that. It's common for if you're head of data to also have BI under you, even though you're doing data science as well. So most of my time have been spent on the consumer side, so companies that deal directly with consumers, D2C essentially, but across many different industries, but have spent some time in the B2B world as well.
Very cool. And then when you were first starting out your career, so was your background mathematics, engineering, or how'd you end up originally breaking into the data space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually started out in economics, and I just don't think I was like mentally mature to really grasp macroeconomics at the time. But I did like the math side of it because that was fun. And when I took my first statistics class, I was like, okay, this is really fun. I can actually see how I can get a job in this field one day, And so I actually ended up studying statistics with a goal of getting into credit scoring of all things, which I did for some time actually. But yes, I'm a statistician, a recovering statistician by training. Today you see folks from many different areas coming in to the field. Back then it was a lot of econometricians, statisticians, operations research. Yeah.
All right. And then when do you think the term, I guess, data science really became popular? I was listening to a different podcast a few days ago, and they were claiming that Facebook actually was the first company to coin the term data science. So I'm curious when your role kind of flipped over from statistician to more data science.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, I didn't take on that title until about 2014, and that was when I was working for a company in Los Angeles doing data science, more kind of econometric stuff, and I ended up working in San Francisco for Stitch Fix, and that was about the time where you had Airbnb and Uber and Square and all these guys coming up and hiring lots of LinkedIn, hiring lots of people called data scientists. Now, in terms of when the term started, I think it was probably, I would guess around 2008, 2010. So right around that time is when the term became popular. I don't know who coined it. I had heard at some point it was DJ Patil, who I think was in the Obama administration, like chief data officer or something like that. But maybe it was Facebook. I actually don't know. I don't even know where I heard that, but I remember hearing that once. But I would say around that time. And look, coming out of that last recession, that was just an amazing time for new companies being born. And many of them were quite data driven, especially now with apps being more of a thing and the phone. And so that generated a ton of new data. And you saw many new folks coming onto the data scene. And that was about the time where I started hearing about data scientists. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. And I know what we are really curious about, Kim, here at Datalogz is really just the emergence of BI. I mean, it's a relatively new space. And since you've been in the data space for the last 20 years or so, leading teams, can you give us your perspective on some of the key problems that BI teams have, whether it's on, the tech side, whether it's with people and structure? If you could dive into that, that would be great.
Yeah. So I think first off, then when we talk about BI, it may be just worth defining it for a moment. So BI are things that has to do with analytics, right? So you're answering business questions with data, and you're helping your stakeholders make better decisions, and it's sort of like you're helping them guide the ship with data. Now, the data just can't tell you what you need to do. You need humans involved to interpret the data, and sometimes, of course, dashboards are a big part of this, right? If you want to generate insights that are recurring or stuff you have to look at, KPIs, et cetera, whatever it might be, you need dashboards. So that's kind of how I think of BI or analytics. Data science is where you get a little bit more into machine learning and stuff like that. And the end product is often something that optimizes the business. Now, there's a lot of blurry lines between these two fields, that's for sure. But let's just kind of at least not try to define data science, but we can define BI as the world of analytics and dashboards and strategic analytics. Now, back to your question, in terms of the challenges, there are really two main type of challenges, and I think today we can spend more time on the second than the first, but I do think they're both very important. So the first is, as a BI team or analytics team, how do you interact with stakeholders? That's number one. And then the second one is, what does your tech stack look like, or your data stack? What are the tools you're using to do your work, right? So we can kind of separate these two things. Obviously, starting with the first one, when you look at analytics teams, there's sort of like two main ways that they choose to work with stakeholders. And one way is, we can call it like the ticket model. And basically, you take a request, you tell people when you're going to do it, you give back the answer, and then you move on. And then there's the more strategic analytics model, where you're being a thought partner and you're working closely with your business partners. I'm a big fan of the second one, the strategic analytics model, not so much the ticket one. It's not that there's anything wrong with tickets per se, and I think they have a role in many types, many verticals, particularly engineering, and stuff, for good reasons. But for BI or analytics, I don't think the ticket model is the right model, because what happens is that when you receive a ticket, you're basically being asked some sort of question, and you answer that. And then you might get another question, you answer that. What you're actually doing is you're sort of following somebody else's thought process, and probably someone who's not an analytics person and does not really know how to analyze data, but you're following their thought process, which means that A, you end up wasting a lot of time, B, you may not get to the right question, or the right answer, or the right question. So it's actually bad for both parties. I think many stakeholders think that they want the ticket model, but it's not actually what they want. What they want is the strategic partner who can help them think about things in a different way. That's actually what they want, right? Not that you need friction, but you need that back and forth. So you need to have strategic analytics where you seek the question behind the question. You have conversations around things rather than tickets, and you build those relationships, and that can be incredibly powerful. And sometimes those questions might turn into a dashboard, but the dashboard is just a means to an end. It always starts with a business plan. But that's like that model now. But on the technical side, on the tooling and the data stack, there, of course, the risk is that if that's set up poorly, you lose a ton of efficiency and hence a ton of money, right? Either money because you're wasting time, or you're just spending too much compute or whatever, right? So that's the other side of it. And here, there's a number of things that can go wrong. The thing I see mostly, and I think this is universal, is that you bring on the team, they start spinning up stuff, they start spinning up tables and data models, and before you know it, it just grows like some sort of fungus, you know what I mean? Bad analogy. All of a sudden it just grows, and it exponentially grows somehow. And before you know it, there's like 5 different ways to capture metric X. There's this table like breaks all the time, and there's outage here, and you have 500 dashboards with probably 60% of them not being used by anyone, but they're still taking up space. So you're building this giant mess, and you take on so much data tech debt that that you actually end up drowning in that, and you can't be strategic. You can't even do the ticket one if you want to do that, and you're sort of stuck there. So that's sort of like the second part of it.
And then on that second part, I'm curious for organizations you've gone into where they already had that massive amount of kind of BI technical debt, cost, unused dashboards. What is your approach to fix that initially?
Yeah, I mean, I think that each situation can be quite different, obviously, but there are some general principles that you'd have to follow. So I think first of all, you want to take a look at your warehouse, not your lake so much, but your warehouse, and ensure that you have clean summary tables that capture the source of truth, and everyone in the team has agreed on that. So you're going to have to invest in cleaning up your data models and setting up these summary tables and having a single source of truth of things. So that's number one. So obviously, this requires data engineering and data modeling, et cetera, et cetera. But that's one part. The other part is to take a look at your dashboard portfolio. And my approach has normally been, let's do a distribution of usage across the dashboards, and you have this long tail. And then at some point you make a decision and you say, if a dashboard is not used more than X times per month or by X people, whatever the rule is, typically it's like number of users and maybe end usage. So it's like a dual metric. Unless maybe it's the CEO who uses it, right? There are obviously exceptions. Then you actually like take down the dashboard and you ask for forgiveness and not permission, right? So that's kind of so you cut it down like that. And I think these two efforts combined, the data modeling and the summary tables, that generates so much efficiency and cuts down confusion, and also will help you cut down tables you don't need anymore, which are running daily but nobody looks at it. And then the dashboard just really simplifies things.
Yeah, and I think, that's exactly why we're, solving for BI sprawl and what we're doing in the BI ops space. Like, because these problems get out of hand and you don't know who's using what, there's duplicate everything. There's all of this, bad dashboards that maybe the CEO or executive leadership are reporting out on. So do you think that there's a way to maybe prevent this? You did mention the warehouse, but is there a way that organizations can be proactive about not even getting to that point of BI sprawl, not letting their BI environment get out of hand? I mean, obviously, we'd love for organizations to use Datalogz, but we just keep talking to so many larger enterprises that are, data mature companies that kind of have this problem to the point where it's a really large kind of feat to get back from it. So how can organizations be proactive when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think it's so, and I think you guys have if not coined this term, but at least talked about it, which is this notion of BI ops, right? And this is something that traditionally would not exist. Maybe very large companies would have these types of roles, but so what you have to decide now is when you look at the journey of the data team. So you think of like the sort of S curve where in the beginning you're just trying to convince people, if you're starting from scratch, that data is a good thing, and maybe you have a single data engineer and a data analyst, and you start trying to get something up and running, and then you hit that point where people want more, and you collectively agree as a leadership team that this is a thing, and then you start hiring. What would normally happen is you would hire, and then get to a point where now you're sitting on this massive amount of BI sprawl and tech debt, and then you have to, hit reverse, as I mentioned before, and start cleaning up, like going backwards almost to clean up. Move would be, as you're on that climb, growing the team, get BI ops in there when you have product market fit as a data team
Huh.
and you're connecting with the business and adding value. Don't do it too early because then you might just end up overhiring and not be set up. But once you're connected, you have that product market fit. I often use the term product market fit for data teams because even though you're a strategic partner, you're also a service for the company. And you have product market fit. It means that people are using your recommendations and you're moving the needle, right? And that's what you want to hire for, because hiring more means more money for the business, right? But then maybe at that point you want to get that BI ops person in here. We actually, one of my previous jobs actually had a person who played that BI ops role, a really smart guy, and he did a great job cataloging all the dashboards, looking at our how much we were spending on our cloud service in terms of warehousing and all this kind of stuff, and also did a great job actually like setting best practices on how we use DBT and other things like that. So it's just one person, but that was really, really helpful. So bringing that in at that point, I think would be a good thing. I just don't see that. Most of the time you wait until it's really bad and then you start fixing it, you know. But you can get ahead of it. Just don't do it too early.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's a great answer. I think what we're seeing now is enterprises being kind of more reactive than proactive, but I think you make some great points there. So on that same note, do you think there are best practices for how BI teams should be structured for success?
I mean, I think again, yes, but if you think about it, we probably have to break this down a little bit. So there's best practices in terms of how you operate, and then in best practice in terms of how you staff, right? So I think any data team, whether it's data science or BI team, I think it is good to get your first data engineer in early. Now of course nowadays there's a lot of tools. You don't necessarily. There are many tools data engineers can leverage to do things, like whether it's ETL, there's a ton of tools, and pipeline monitoring. You can work with Datalogz to help you with this. So that for all these functions, there are tools, which means that you don't have to hire as many people as you did 10 years ago, where you just had to do all on your own. But still get that someone who really understands warehousing and data engineering in early. Because that limits a lot of the mistakes you're going to make down the line. I think, and then I think in the beginning, don't hire specialists. Just sort of hire all-around athletes who can do many different things, and then specialize later. Right? Those are other things. I think think about. I am very pro using tools instead of doing it yourself. I think 10, 12 years ago it was different. You had to do a lot of it yourself, but like really get a sense of the landscape in terms of the tools that can help you and bring that in early. And then I think, really decide, do you want to be a ticket shop or do you want to be a strategic partner? My experience is that you go the ticket route, no one's ever going to be happy. You're not going to be happy. Your stakeholders are not happy. They really don't want that, right? They want opinion. They want partnership. They don't always know it, but that's what they want. You may not know that that's what you want, but that's actually how you get most professional impact and happiness. So make a decision early on how you're going to do it, and educate your stakeholders on how you're going to approach it. That's another thing I would say.
And when you say ticket shop, you mean like a queue of requests where there's a business problem, someone just basically submits a ticket, hey, I have this problem, I need a dashboard for this. Then a data engineering or BI team that's disconnected just makes it.
Yeah, that's what I mean by ticket shop. So someone has a question, they submit a ticket. Could be, I'd like to see sales by country divided by 5, by quarter. And it's like kind of a bad example, but let's just roll with it. And then you're like, why? Okay, fine, we can do that. But then why are you going to divide by 5? Why do we need to see sales by country? Then it's like, well, actually, what we're trying to figure out, because it's these countries, we change something in our business. And we want to kind of compare it. Okay, so you're really trying to get to some impact analysis based on something you did, and you think you can compare countries. Well, okay, there's actually maybe a better way to do this. Or actually, it turns out we did look at this, or there was actually an A/B test where this was evaluated. I'm really just making stuff up here. But the thing is that, get to the question behind the question. If you're just receiving a ticket, answering that, you can be sure that there's going to be a follow-up thing later on and a follow-up thing. And now you're just following someone's thought process around. You don't really know what's going on. And the assumption, if you think about it, the ticket model, right? The ticket model assumes that the person doing the work does not have strong insights on how to do the work. But that seems a little bit strange. How is it that the person who lives in the data every day doesn't have strong, valuable opinions on how we could look at this, right? So that's the underlying assumption, but it's never explicitly stated. It's not like anyone would think that explicitly, but that's actually what that model is based on. A better model is, let's get together and talk about the business question, and then formulate a way to do this, and let's go do it.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. And that's also why I hire athletes early on, like more generalists. They will indeed be able to have opinions on how to solve a wide array of problems.
And how do you deal with where you have more business requests than kind of that central data and BI team can realistically handle? Is that where you start implementing, hey, well, let's build these models in dbt, have them ready, then the business can start just building their own dashboards, reports on these different data sets? I'm curious how you think about that as you get more and more questions. And at some point, the central BI team or central data team reaches a wall where there's only so many dashboards, reports, that insights you can draw and fully understand.
So just make sure I answer your question right. So you're talking about a situation where the amount of demand for the services of the analytics team is overwhelming the capacity of the team or the throughput of the team, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So when you said data as a product, this is product market fit point and looking to kind of growth scale stage.
Yeah, I think there's this actually requires like an approach of three things you're doing simultaneously. And I think sometimes one of these things are not done, and only two of things. So one thing you got to do is, obviously, you have to look at your efficiency. Like, are we limited from an efficiency standpoint because of the tooling we have? So that goes back to having BI ops to cut down waste, both in terms of money spent on warehousing and just too many dashboards from that have just compounded over time without any overall strategy. So you got to sort of have that role, take a bird's eye view of what you're doing, make sure you have a strategy in terms of what dashboard you really need, make sure you have clean summary tables. So if I need to know sales by country, there's only one place to get that, and it at most requires a single join just to do that real fast, right? As opposed to I have to go into Slack and be like, does anyone know how to define country? Well, actually, there's country over here, but there's country over on that table. And if you're talking about EMEA, you actually have to go to this table over here. And it's so like, and actually, it turns out that we can't differentiate. We don't know if Puerto Rico should be in the database as part of the United States, but do you want to include that? Like, there's no like standards. So that's just a waste, right? And that has to be cleared out. Now, that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is that you now have two things you can do. You could hire more people, sure, but I think that, especially now with cost of capital going up and hiring is going to be more difficult, you really have to take a look at your portfolio and ask yourself, take a step back and remove, it's sort of like when you make slides, sometimes you got to cut your favorite slide when you're in love with it. You got to go through your portfolio and say, where do I have product market fit from an analytics perspective, and where am I doing work but product market fit is not there? Does it make sense? So what do I mean by product market fit? With analytics, data science is a little different. You build a machine learning model or whatever, and it fuels some sort of business process and optimizes, and you can directly measure that in some cases, but with analytics, product market fit could be that, hey, I work really closely with the marketing team. We talk every week. We talk about what's working, what's not working, and they're making decisions. And you can't really see that on a chart like, well, this is what I drove in efficiency, because it's a continuous process of being a thought partner, and you're continuously optimizing. So there's no like sort of inflection point in the graph where you can point to people and say, oh, I did that. But that is product market fit. The marketing team is listening to the recommendations. You're working closely with them. It's a partnership. And if you exited that partnership, they would be lost, right? That's what I would call product market fit. But product market fit could also be that you identified that you could save $1 million because of something that wasn't working. But ask yourself, like, take a look in the mirror and ask, where do I have product market fit? If you don't have product market fit, I would consider, exiting that, right? And if you never know where you don't have product market fit, I have had cases with like customer service teams. They can actually they can need a lot of data because they're constantly looking at the different customer services pods and what's the efficiency and what's the cost per ticket they take, and that's very data heavy. But I found cases where actually they were better off hiring their own person. We might maintain the data model. They could hire their own person because it's really mainly just a series of small questions on top of each other that are actually very critical for them to understand what's going on in their business. But it wasn't really an area where the analytics team could really add a ton of value other than providing a data model. So to cut out the stuff or transfer the stuff where there isn't product market fit. So now you've opened up capacity. Now, if that doesn't work, of course, hiring could be the obvious answer, but that depends on where you are in your life cycle and how much budget you have, stating the obvious here. But so that's kind of how I would think about it. So think about product market fit for analytics. Hiring is always an option, but I wouldn't go there first. I would check the product market fit first. And then, of course, if you have to calculate sales by country and you have to go 3 places by country, or go to Slack and ask for someone who's been at a company for 2 years and that's just like that's just a big waste. And if you have 500 dashboards with 80% not being used, but you're still maintaining them, but you don't know why you're maintaining them, that's also a waste.
Yep. We hear this all the time. Oh my gosh, hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars wasted. And nobody looks into these things until it's like millions of dollars later. And it's like, why are we spending all this money? We hear it all the time. So I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, Logan, I think we have time for one more question. If you want to give that a go before we end off here.
Sure. Yeah.
Just in terms of the last question, Kim, I'm just curious how you measure success of a BI team. What are those key KPIs that you keep track of to make sure that you are delivering value for the business at the end of the day?
I mean, I think that is a really good question. My short answer is not going to be very good, because there is no one way of doing this. I can't think of a single metric that I could create that could track how the team is doing, right? It wouldn't be like number of dashboards generated, because that's a terrible metric, or number of codes written. Maybe it's actually better that number of code lines deleted would be a better metric, right? So there's no such thing. But I do think that going back to this concept of product market fit, and it's not so much a dashboard, but you have to have a cadence with your team where you're constantly evaluating the work you're doing, and are you doing the right thing, and is it adding value? And when I look at analytics work, it can add value in a number of ways. It can be a dashboard with maybe commentary on a weekly basis that many people engage with. And if people engage with the dashboard, it means that they are more informed on how the business is doing. If people understand how the business is doing, they can make better business decisions. This is very hard to quantify or see, but I will stand by. I will anytime stand by the statement that if everyone in the company, not just the data people or the people who in finance who are looking at this every week, the more informed people are about how the business is doing, whether it's good or bad, the better the business. If it's bad, then everyone can think about the solution. If you don't know there's a problem, how can you think about the solution? If it's good, you can think about how to do more of this, right? So a good dashboard with commentary, not just show the data, say something about what you're seeing, and getting adoption for that, that's a win. Can't really create a metric for that, really. Could, but it's then. But the other one is like have constant reviews where you ask yourself the insights we're generating, are people taking action based on this? Is it leading to something? I've had many cases where I worked with teams and we generated lots of data, but not because of their fault, but in many cases, due to the situation, they had to go more by like instinct. In which case, actually, there wasn't product market fit. Yeah, we were selling the product, they were buying it, but it wasn't doing anything. So we weren't really like moving the needle. And so that's another one. So that's another one thing to really look at. And then of course you're going to have cases where you run a big A/B test, or you discover something and you save a lot of money. So what I've always tried to do is that when I create a roadmap, I try to make sure that I get buy-in from my stakeholders, but I also try to make sure that I listen to the team if they have ideas in terms of what they want to do. Don't just ask people, what do you want me to do? You can ask what's important to you, but also ask your team, what have you seen in the data that's important? And you bring these two things together, and then you sell that into organization. And then when you're done with the roadmap cycle, say it's quarterly, do a review of what you did and have that reflection session where you ask yourself, where do we have product market fit and where we didn't? And if you don't, see if you can generate it. And if you can't, cut it out, move on, right? And that's sort of like, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's sort of like how I think about it.
Yeah, it sounds like to me, kind of engagement is one of the big factors. Is the business adopting it? Is this driving change? And then establishing where they ultimately trust in the data, in the results that's being produced. It's not about quantity. It's about, okay, can I trust this to drive actionable insights, change in the environment?
And that's like, and that's something we actually haven't touched on, which we probably should if there's time, which is going back to this notion of BI ops. So first comment is that when you talk about like, this is not a dashboard to show what the analytics team is doing, but you can absolutely have dashboards on how many unused tables do you have, how many unused dashboards do you have, or you can keep track of this. But so that's actually something that I have done in some cases where we like kind of keep track of the stack. Doesn't make sense, like report on the stack. But another thing is this, and the reason why not having a messy foundation is important and not having 6 tables to go to. I think every time I talk about this, there's one more table, but having 8 pages to go to get country code, right? Is this every single time you mess up. This is the thing about like data science is about, everybody thinks that data science is cool and machine learning is cool and most people don't understand it, and you build a cool model that can do a product recommendation. That stuff that's more the kind of stuff that I've always been into, but it's a very different thing and it's more crisp. Analytics, as we talked about, your success is, do people make decisions based on what you're saying? Are you finding opportunities? But here's the thing. If you mess up in analytics, right, and you report the wrong number, you have to do something good 10 times for every mistake you make. And the mistakes compound. As you compound those mistakes, your credibility is gone. And at the end of the day, if you want to be a strategic analytics team, right, which is where I think is the place you want to be, but you cannot lose trust. If trust is gone, that's it, right? Sure, then you can do the ticket thing, but that's not where you add the most value. So trust is incredibly important, and trust is lost when you report the wrong data. One reason you report the wrong data is because your warehouse is a mess, right? And someone doesn't know that you had to grab this table over here, the 9th table, to filter something that was the test accounts, right? Or whatever. So that is just a very critical thing. And I think it's often overlooked, but when you lose trust, it's really hard to get back.
That's actually exactly why we founded Datalogz, is that once you lose trust because maybe it's a duplicate report in your environment, there's a data feed that breaks, there's 6 different tables leading up to this that ultimately lead to someone consuming the wrong data.
Yeah.
Every single BI manager has a story where someone went into the wrong report, should have been offline, should have been caught 6 months ago, but ultimately they made a bad decision and it came back to them. And now what's supposed to be driving toward using BI, anyone can access, create great data, create great reports, create analytics insights, is being lost because of one silly incident. So we created Datalogz where our goal is to go in, have the models built to flag all those potential problems where you can lose trust from your stakeholders instantly rather than catching it after the fact.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. And I think, as we talked about, I hope that going forward, analytics team will bring in this role earlier rather than when you're about to lose that trust and everyone is unhappy because the warehouse is bad. And you also think morale, right? It's like, it's hard finding really good people, as we know, right? And good people will churn out if the work is not rewarding, right? And the work is not rewarding when you have to spend 4 times what you need to spend to get some simple data, and then you end up making mistakes that are really not even your fault, and it's just really and then you're sort of in a position where you don't even feel like you're adding value. So I think, and then people churn out, and then you lost that great person. So yeah, there are all these halo effects.
Exactly. Well, Kim, thanks so much for your time and hopping on the podcast today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Of course.
thanks so much, Kim, and thanks everyone for tuning in.